I want to talk tonight, as I've spoken in the past, about an important phenomenon. It's like a kind of hardwired into us, but it's something that we forget frequently. I forget frequently. That's forgotten frequently. And that's the relationship between how we understand and interpret various events as they take place and the people who are responsible for those events and the frames that we use and how impactful they are, how important they are for us in determining whether the event in front of us will, how we react. I think in a lot of different circles that I walk in, they talk about the difference between impact and intention. That, as you remember, once I gave a sermon about driving. I think I was driving in Jerusalem in the sermon, and somebody cut me off, and then I was getting angry, and then I noticed it was one of my close friends. I don't know if that's ever happened to anybody here. And all of a sudden, it was remarkable just to see what came over me. The minute before I was angry, and the next minute I thought, it must have been a mistake. And the backdrop for this conversation, of course, is the remarkably troubling story that takes place in tomorrow morning's Torah reading, which coincides with this year's Shabbat of the Child. Shabbat of the Child this year and the reading, the kind of weekly reading from the Torah, bring us into this strange relationship between children and the way that we view children, and the troubling portion of the Torah in Leviticus chapter 10, in the tragic tale of the two children of Aaron the priest, his two eldest children, Nadav and Avihu. The Torah tells us that they offered a strange fire, asher lo tzivautam, that wasn't commanded, and a fire came out of heaven and took those two children. And that event has been interpreted in many ways. There are many in the classic commentaries who essentially work in the way that Job's friends worked, to find all manner of interpretation to justify this horrific moment of divine rage, of catastrophic, traumatic pain. There's no shortage of justifications for this moment. They brought a strange fire that is itself worthy of divine punishment or punishment. They were drunk when they went into the Holy of Holies. They were wearing frayed clothing. They weren't yet married and hadn't had children. The list is quite long, depending on whatever the value is that you particularly honor. They were guilty of it in some way. The text gives us no such indication. There is no reason other than this strange fire that they brought, this foreign fire. And then, of course, later on in Jewish history, there were those who actually identified with these two children. In later years, commentaries from Or HaChaim, the great 17th century Moroccan sage, through the Hasidic masters, wanted to actually see these two children as unique, special, too refined, too holy. Their sin, a sin of overreach, not a sin, God forbid, of defying God's will. But I would like to see them tonight through the prism and the metaphor of the challenges that are faced by neurodiverse children and the risk inherent to those children of child abuse. For those of you who do not know neurodiversity, it is a concept that recognizes that the diversity of the human brain is such, and human mind, that many of us, fall on a spectrum of quote-unquote normalcy, and there are those who are diverse from us. It acknowledges that people have different ways of processing information, communicating, and experiencing the world. Some examples of neurodiversity or neurodivergent conditions are autism, ADHD, dyslexia, bipolar disorder. These conditions are not diseases or disorders, but variations of the human experience that can bring strengths as well as challenges. One of the challenges that are faced by neurodiverse children is the difficulty of fitting into social norms and expectations. They may struggle with communication, sensory processing, social interactions, or executive functioning skills. These challenges can lead to frustration, anxiety, or depression, and can trigger negative emotions from other people, such as bullying or exclusion. In the story of Nadav and Avihu, we can see a parallel with the challenges of neurodiversity. Nadav and Avihu may have had good intentions in offering their fire, but they went against the established rules and norms of religious practice. Their action was seen as disrespectful, as rebellious, or even sacrilegious. They may have been seen as strange or abnormal or deviant. Likewise, neurodiverse children may have ways of expressing themselves, learning, or coping with challenges, but these ways may not fit the expectations of their parents, teachers, or peers. They may be judged as odd, disruptive, or difficult. Their behaviors or attitudes may be misinterpreted as intentional misbehavior or defiance that results from their brain wiring. It's misinterpreted. Another challenge that are faced by neurodiverse children is the risk of abuse or neglect. Children who are perceived as different or vulnerable may be targeted by abusers who exploit their power imbalance. This can happen in various forms, such as physical abuse or sexual abuse, emotional abuse or neglect. And those consequences can be long-lasting, affecting the child's physical health, their mental well-being, and future relationships. In the story of Nadav and Avihu, we can also see a warning about the risk of abuse. Nadav and Avihu were the sons of a high priest who had a position of authority and respect. They were also young and inexperienced and may have lacked guidance and protection from their father. The fact that they offered strange fire suggests that they may have been experimenting or testing the limits of their freedom. The fact that they were consumed by a fire suggests that maybe they were punished for that transgression. But it also raises the question of whether their punishment was proportionate to their offense. I'm not, of course, speaking purely in the abstract about neurodiversity and about the potential dangers of being misunderstood, not seen for who you are, having yourself mislabeled or your behaviors misinterpreted. I myself was on a journey for the last decade plus with my wife Ariel to understand our neurodiverse child. We went to many, many different therapeutic experts all over the country, all over the city. There wasn't anything that we left behind. And with each and every successive journey, we came up against labels and acronyms, experts who invited, because of their good intentions, us into the world of how it would work if. And so we finally discovered that we had a child whose brain was just wired differently. I was talking to a friend of mine this morning, and he was relaying a kind of normal morning for him. He has 3 young children, and he was talking about how hard it is to get them to school every morning. I'm sure none of us can remember that moment. It's all been smooth, I know. And he kind of went through his inner reverie of moment to moment. It was like, one sock on, next sock on, shoes off, put them in the car. They don't want to sit in the car, they get out of the car. You see my dear friend Karen, who knows this really well, just what it is to be a mama, a dad, a parent, an uncle, an aunt, a friend. And he said this line, he said, just wanted one moment where there wasn't resistance. And as he was speaking, I kept thinking to myself, I think that's what it's like inside my brain every day, with myself. Can I just get through the day where I say to myself, hey, you're gonna go do this, and my own brain doesn't say, no, we're not going there. Now's not the time to write your sermon. You're gonna play guitar for a couple of minutes. There was an immediate understanding that the mapping of our own inner speak is mapped pretty much the way we were spoken to in moments like that. And for many neurodiverse children who have a fight-flight reflex that is hyperactive most of the time. For many neurodiverse children who can't speak, or neurodiverse children who were mislabeled at a certain age, their resistance and their defiance can be perceived as willfulness, can be perceived as some moral lack. What's wrong with my children? I remember when we first started the Shabbat of the Child, we read from Alice Miller's oeuvre, the great German psychotherapist who wrote about the drama of the gifted child, or prisoners of childhood, or against their own will, who spoke about parenting guides that were alive and well at the turn of the 20th century and into the 20th century, and are still being taught to parents around this country and around the world about the nature of the child, to be resistant, to be rebellious. In some religious worldviews, it's actually part and parcel of the nature of human beings is to be willful, to be sinful. Sin crouches at the door. Part of our innate nature to be rebels against God. Nadav and Avihu, two innocent children who might have just been neurodiverse, just trying out this strange to others fire. Strange to them. And God parats, God bursts forth and punishes them. Neurodiverse children are vulnerable to abuse if they're not protected and supported by their caregivers, teachers, and community. They often don't have any idea what's going on for them, why the music at the bar bat mitzvah is making them so angry. They have no idea what led their frustration over not having the right kind of cupcake that led them into a rage and had all of the cupcakes against the wall before you could say, hold on, there's vanilla too. It was through the last 10 years of trying to understand the brain of my child and the paucity and the poverty of the literature and the methodologies and the actual support necessary that it began to break my heart to think that we who were so privileged and so lucky to be living in this remarkably, profoundly privileged city with experts everywhere and with you name it of resources, how much we were suffering, to think about how much others who were so much less privileged, what were they doing with their neurodiverse children whom they didn't know were neurodiverse and didn't have people telling them, oh, you have a child whose amygdala is on fire. It's not willfulness, they're not bad children, they're not bad people, and you're not a bad parent. Here's what you need to know. And through this journey, I came to understand my own neurodiversity. I came to understand behaviors that for years had been confusing to me. States of awareness, aggravation, frustration, annoyance. How I could flip on from being in the one moment generous and open to the next moment being very curmudgeon-y and frustrated and not be able to articulate it, as if literally my prefrontal cortex had been hijacked by my amygdala. There was no emergency in the room, but I was treating it like it was a fight or flight. Nadav and Avihu, and the responsibility to protect our children. The way that we look at the world has everything to do with the way that we imagine people's intentions and motivations are. When we imagine somebody is out to cut me off, we will treat them like they're a danger. When we imagine that it was just my friend who didn't see me, and all of a sudden, when we imagine that this child before us is not being willful, this adult with their hijacked amygdala might not really know how to calm themselves down at this moment. We become in that moment, warriors of a kind of radical and absolutely almost superhuman compassion. We become aware of our responsibility to understand what's at the core and the root, at the shoresh of so much of what happens in the world. And if Shabbat of the Child and this month of the child is profoundly doing one thing over the last 3 years and hopefully many more, it will be to be able to step into the shoes of our children and see the world through their eyes. To be able to say in this moment, you know what? That's just who they are. And not only, it's not just who they are, but it'll become a source of their blessings too. Their challenges also will bring with it rewards and benefits, and they are unique. Those particularly diverse children have their gifts to give us, and their challenges for us to learn from. So I want to bless tonight. I want to bless all of you neurodiverse children out there who didn't know it. And I want to bless all of you parents of neurodiverse children who do know it. You're not alone. Your journey has been a courageous one. Your search to find the right stories and theories and frames in which to understand your remarkable children will bring a better world for others. And we can pray together. God should bless us. That as we read this story tomorrow morning and in future years, we can imagine children just like Nadav and Avihu, whose curiosity and whose unique way of looking at the world was misunderstood, and pray that those children will grow up in a different kind of world where their uniqueness is understood and protected and honored. That's our job as adults. That's our job. So we can pray that this weekend and this month will do what it can in the ongoing story of how we as a society learn to protect, celebrate, and love the most vulnerable amongst us. May that become the case, and we can all say, Amen.